This is Duke University.
Remarkable introduction. I had the great privilege of getting to know your president when he was at Yale, and it was a very special experience because I was so touched by the Boucher Award. And for the students in the room, if you've not read about Boucher, who actually earned the PhD in 1876 from Yale, please do so. He was a remarkable person. But please, join me in giving a round of applause to an amazing man, your president, Dick Brockett. Please. People are often surprised that with my math background, I still begin with poetry in these kinds of talks. My mother was an English teacher. Each of us is the products of our childhood experiences. And it was William Carlos Williams who said, it's difficult to find news in poetry, and yet men die miserably every day because of a lack of what is found there. And so I begin with words from someone who lived in your state for some time. It was our beloved and now late Maya Angelou, who said, lift up your eyes upon this day, breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it, this dream, into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the image of your most public self. Sculpt it into the shape of your most private need. Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning. Good evening to you at Duke. Good evening. Give her a round of applause for the portrait, please. I want to talk about what I have seen in recent years as I think about underrepresentation in science, the challenges that we face, what I find surprising about what we still don't seem to know or understand about what we need to do as we think about this critical challenge of finding more people from diverse backgrounds who can move to the professoriate, whether in science or science-related areas like the medical school. Tonight represents for me, personally, in many ways, a dream fulfilled. If someone had told me 50 years ago that one day I would be speaking to an audience at Duke and that I would ask my students who are here, either as students or as faculty members, to stand, I would not have believed it. So if you are a graduate of UMBC, stand up and let people see you. As a grad student or as a faculty member, stand up and let people see you, please. I'm so proud. Several have MD, PhDs are on the faculty, others are in grad school, and I had just met with others who are not here tonight. My campus has students from 150 countries. And what is fascinating is that these students are aspiring to be leaders in different disciplines. And the one thing I think about, and I say this to colleagues, is that many students come to college with an interest and with dreams to be doctors or lawyers or teachers or scientists. And one of the questions I think we need to ask ourselves, whether someone's coming to med school or get a PhD or be a scientist or an engineer, is what is that student's chance of actually fulfilling his or her dream? The research says that large numbers of people in our country who begin with an interest, particularly in science and engineering, do not find success in science and engineering. And I'll talk about the study that I chaired for the National Academy of Sciences. But I actually begin with a story. You know, I say that Baltimore is the Upper South. The Upper South. One day we think like people in Philadelphia, the next day we think like people in Richmond. It depends on the issue. I would call you the South. You know, although we think of Duke as kind of a bastion of liberal thought in many ways, interestingly. But I come from the Deep South, Birmingham, Alabama, the Deep South. Make no mistake about it. Why do I tell you that? I grew up, as Dick was saying, during the Civil Rights Movement, and My experiences as a child shaped my worldview, obviously, and my thinking about becoming an educator, a mathematician, and someone to prepare people in science. As we think about science and society, clearly the experiences we have when we're young often have more of an influence on us than we might think. The book that I recently wrote, entitled Holding Fast to Dream, has a subtitle which is Empowering Youth from the Civil Rights Crusade to STEM Achievement. And the book is the result of several lectures that I gave in Boston for institutions there, higher ed institutions and K-12 people, answering the question, what led you to this interest in producing scientists of color and others? And I found myself struggling with some of the questions simply because I had not thought about some of the experiences I had. I was sitting in the back of church when I was 12 in 1963, and the man at the lectern said, if the children participate in this peaceful march, all of America will understand that even our babies know the difference between right and wrong. And they'll be able to get a better education. And the only thing I could think about was that I was so tired of those hand-me-down books from the white schools, which they would give us after the white kids finished with them. And I'll never forget looking up and saying, who is this guy? I had not wanted to be there. Who kid wants to be in church in the middle of the week? My parents had bribed me with the two things I loved most, eating and mathematics. So I was eating M&Ms, the good kind with the peanuts, and doing my math, getting fatter and smarter all the time. And I look up, and there is this guy, and I said, who is this guy? And they say, of course, his name is Martin Luther King. And I began to listen, and I found myself believing for the first time that tomorrow could be different from today. That I, as a child, could have some impact on my own future. And so I went home and I said to my parents, I want to march. I want to be a part of this. And they said, of course, absolutely not. To which I responded, you guys are hypocrites. Now, at that time, students, you did not tell your parents they were hypocrites. All right? Go to your room, boy. The next day they came in the next morning and they had not slept. And what they said was this. It was not that we didn't trust you. We did not trust the people who would be over you in jail. Because if you march, you're going to jail. And the reason we were going to jail was that the city would not give the civil rights leaders a permit to march. You see. Now, why is that important? They had a conversation with me which led to our agreeing I would go. My students always say, you must have been a brave kid at 12. I was not a brave kid. In fact, the only thing I'd ever attacked in my life was a math problem. Did you get that? If there was a fight, I was running the other way. What I did know was that I wanted a better education. The other part, though, when you think about science and society, is this. I always, from that point on, connected solving math problems with solving the problems of society. I always did. And what I found fascinating was that often the most interesting problems could not be solved quickly. And later, when my mother, the English teacher, became a math specialist. Anybody remember anything called the new math? Anybody old enough for new math? Some of the older people in there, right? The reason the new math failed was that we in universities did not go into K-12 as partners. We just went to tell them what to do, and we frightened teachers even more in many cases. But my mother went back to become a math specialist. So she was an English specialist and a math specialist, and I was her guinea pig. And so I was learning poetry and literature at the same time that I was learning word problems, because what she came to understand as an English teacher who became a math teacher was this. The better a child can read, the better the child can think. And the better the child can think, the greater the facility with which the child can attack a word problem. Because we don't discuss or attack chemistry or physics or math or engineering or problems in medicine using numbers. We discuss problems in the social sciences all the way over to science in words. And to solve problems, one must be able to read and think well. So she was working to figure out how you connect the reading, the thinking, and the math. All right? So I'm working on that all the time. I'm working in the civil rights period. I spend a week in jail, a terrible week. But what it taught me was this, that even children can be empowered to have an impact on their own future and can be enticed into a community that talks about the nobility of the work itself. That we were doing this for a special reason. I'll never forget trying to encourage the kids not to be so upset in the jail. And I'll never forget one evening when our parents were outside of the jail. And Dr. King said this, "What you do this day will have an impact on children yet unborn." And we didn't understand the profundity, but somehow we knew that we needed to keep thinking about that idea, that the world might be different. Now, within a matter of months, what we saw was legislation. After the March on Washington, within a matter of months, in 1964, you had the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Higher Education Act. And as a result, America was changed dramatically. How do I know that? What percent of Americans do you think in 1963 had actually completed college? What would you think? Anybody in the audience? I heard 12%. Somebody else? 16? Now don't let me leave Duke saying you're risk adverse. 5. Anybody else? Come on. 30? Just guess.
22?
It was only 10%. 10% of Americans in the mid-60s had a college degree. Most people did not. How many of you knew that? It's very interesting. Only 10%. Now, let's break it down black and white. At that time, people did not have different groups, racial groups. Everything was black and white. In fact, I can prove it to you. Watch this. Watch this. How many people in the room remember TV that was black and white? How many of you have always had color TV? That's disgusting. But I want the president to see this. This is what I learned that was so fascinating. How many of you were not even born yet in 1963? And there's the disgusting piece. Right? What am I saying? I am telling you this, that most of you are hearing me talk in the same way that I could be talking about something from 100 years before, because you've read about these times, but you would not have been there. But the world is so dramatically different, and one of the points is that at that time, blacks had a certain percent in college, whites. What percent of whites do you think had graduated from college? What do you think? What percent? 10. We said 10 for the entire country. So what percent of whites? 9%. 9. Now, as a math person, you know if it's 10% for the country, whites can advance, right? We know that, right? Right? Got to be more than 10. It's only 11%. And for blacks? It's only 2%. Okay? Now today we break into other racial groups, and we'll get to science, but you need to get a sense of how different the world is. So, what percent today of Americans have a college degree? It's finally to 30%. What percent of whites? It's about 37, 38% of blacks. It's up to about 21% of Asians. I usually get a 90 from somebody. I don't want to say it, but I usually do, right? It is 55%. A lot of kids, a lot of my students, 25% of Asian descent. I mean, a lot of people come from other countries, right? Already graduate 55%, but there are certain Asian groups that are not doing well, but overall. And then, what's the fastest growing group in our country? And what percent? Only 15%, and the Native Americans below that number. You put it all together, I can tell you 2/3 of Americans today, over 25, do not have a college degree. Now, when I say that to my friends of all races, the first thing they say is, Freeman, that couldn't be true. Everybody I know has a college degree. No. Right? College presidents know college presidents. Deans of medical schools know deans of medical schools. Lawyers know lawyers. Right? Grad students know grad students, and plumbers who make more money than any of you all know plumbers. But the point is this. Here's my point. That the vast majority of people may not have a college degree, but 3 times as many people today have gone to college and completed as years ago. But the most significant difference between now and 1963 is that in 1963, nowhere in America could you have had an audience looking like you. There is nowhere in America which you've had an audience of people from different races sitting in the same room. And quite frankly, when talking about people in grad school and medical school, you would not have had this number of women. You would not have had a female dean. I mean, the changes are dramatic in this period. And so what we like to say on my campus, a research campus that really thinks a lot about this 50-year period, because we're getting ready to celebrate our 50th anniversary, is that this 50-year period since the 60s represents an experiment in our country. An experiment involving inclusion. We have been working to bring people from all types of groups into the mainstream. We have been talking about diversity in many different ways for the first time, whether it's about LGBT, about disabilities, about race, gender, income level, income inequality, for the first time as never before. And when thinking about science and society, when we think about particularly these issues of race, race is probably the most sensitive topic to talk about. We can talk about sex more comfortably than we can race. Because you can turn on TV before you know you're seeing something that's embarrassing, but you see it. And yet, when we think about this question of the underrepresentation of students in science, we have a major challenge. And so when I'm working with, I chair this Obama Commission on Educational Excellence, and so I get all the data from all the national agencies. And just one fundamental question, we're talking about science and where we are. Here is the question. What percent of the scientists at the National Institutes of Health are African American or black? What would you think? What percent? Given the health disparities in our country, you know, especially like, what percent are black? What would you think? 1%. Under 0.5%. Well under 1%. Under 1%. In fact, there is not one national agency in America that can say 1% of our scientists, of our PhD scientists, are black. And for Hispanics, it's about 2%. With billions of dollars going into all these areas. And without going into all the arguments, the point is, we know we need many more people from all these populations who can bring their experiences to the work. The reason I placed 3 people of different races on the cover of this book, as opposed to what the publishers wanted me to do, was to put 3 blacks here, was that I wanted to make the point about not just Dr. King's dream, but about the dream I would argue our country needs to have. First of all, a dream about truth. The fact is that when thinking about power in science in our country, it still is primarily in the hands of white men. That is not a negative statement or a positive statement. It is simply the truth. Look at the National Academy of Sciences. This is my friend Mike Summers, who's spoken here. He speaks highly of Duke. And he's a Howard Hughes investigator. He's probably one of the leading, not probably, he is one of the leading producers of African Americans and others who go on to get PhDs in science. I was telling, and amazingly, one of his students of color just got a PhD from him, postdoc, just got tenure at Harvard in biochemistry. Give Mike Summers a round of applause. All right? And then I've got a young black Holocaust scholar, young black male, and then one of my Korean immigrants, who's a wonderful young woman, an American, and they're all studying HIV. Why? Goes back to something that we were talking about before, the problems of humankind. That the dream should be that students of all races, people of all races, are getting to know each other well enough, trusting each other enough, and developing the skills and the competence to know what's necessary to study the problems of humankind, whether in science from the point of view of biochemistry or from the point of view of psychology or from the social sciences. How do we prepare students who will have the interest in helping with these issues and have the skills that they need? the thinking skills that they need. Now, here is the challenge. The National Academy of Sciences study that I conducted was asked for by Senators Kennedy and Clinton and Mikulski, because Rising Above the Gathering Storm report was a wonderful report, but it only had about 2 pages on the issue of demographics in our country. And the big question was this: if we know that half the babies born in America as of 2 to 3 years ago are not white, what will be the impact of this growing diversity in our population on what happens to competitiveness, particularly regarding STEM? And if we look at the data, what you'll see is this. Well, they're talking about producing PhDs in science, or physicians, or people in any science-related area, or engineering. The fact is that only 5% of the American bachelor's degrees are given in natural sciences and engineering. If you look at the data from the National Science Foundation, they will talk about science and engineering, but they will include the social sciences. If you take the social sciences away, and you look at natural sciences and engineering, you have a real challenge. What you'll see is it's only 5% of the degrees. In Europe, it's almost 11%. India is in the process of creating 800 additional universities. 800 additional universities. Here's the other point, really critical issue. For minorities, black, Hispanic, others, the percentage is between 2 and 3. And so the first response from the professoriate is this: go to K through 12. It's a K through 12 problem. That's what we say in universities. The challenge I would say provocatively, is that we in the American society are accustomed to pointing fingers. So universities blame high schools, who blame middle schools, who blame elementary schools, who blame the family, and the husband blames the mother side of the family. Over and over again. All right? But when we looked at the data, this is what we found, and this is what's really sensitive. What do we call the first year of science in universities and engineering? Weed out courses. And here is what's stunning. If you haven't looked at my TED Talk on changing the culture of science, it either gets people upset or they say, yeah, he's right. One way or the other. You're never neutral about it. But it says this. The data will tell you this. The higher the SATs of students, the larger the number of AP credits, the more prestigious the university the student attends, the greater the probability the student will leave science or engineering within the first year or two. So, quite frankly, and my joke is, everybody who starts off in pre-med becomes a great lawyer. and the reason I say that is that the subjects that are quantitatively based are unpredictable when coming to testing. If you think about it. You get 5 problems, 3 you've seen before, 2 you've not seen before, and if you don't have enough time, you don't do well, and you get a C or a D. Now, the advantage, quite frankly, for med school, and I want to give Duke the credit. Duke has done well for blacks in going to med school. You're in the top 5. Give yourselves a hand. It's very impressive. You've not done well in producing the kids who go for PhDs at the undergrad level on, but you've done well at this. And the reason is this, that for the prestigious universities, a lot of students, and you know this, most students will not complete a science degree. They take enough science to do well on the MCAT. This is what the data shows. They do well on the MCAT because they've done well on the SAT. But they get a major in something where their grades can be better and then they can go to med school. But they're not becoming PhDs in science. Where you've done well is in the grad program. Duke does well. I enjoy it. I want to say this to you. I came to say to the president and others, you do a good job as students who come to grad school. I mean, my students say that they get the support they need. And so give yourself a hand by helping students who come from other places to grad school. But this is my challenge to you as I challenged MIT last week. You attract some of the best students of all races in the country. I would say to Duke, you should be among those institutions producing students who are doing well enough in science and engineering to go on to PhDs in science and engineering. And right now, you are not. And the other question is, what makes the difference for us? What we have found is not just about the MILE program and building community and those things. It's also about rethinking the teaching and learning process and innovation. If If you look at the UMBC Chemistry Discovery Center, we've gotten a lot of rewards for what we're doing. It is about rethinking whether lecturing is the best approach for students today in first year and second year science. It is about the use of technology, group work. We use problems out of our biotech companies. We have over 100 companies on campus, biotech and IT companies, started by our faculty and Hopkins faculty. It's about opportunities for professional development, interdisciplinarity, and much more emphasis on teaching students how to connect the research to the teaching earlier, and having higher expectations for ourselves. And quite frankly, making it very clear we can be better, that success is never final. So I would say we're doing well, but we could be even better. I will tell you this, we now lead the country in producing not just students of color, but the key is this: when you're able to help one group, my students of color, you help students in general. There's the point that's key, because it's not just black students who are not doing well in science and engineering. Largest numbers of whites, and in fact, what percent of white students do you think who started science and engineering actually completed bachelor's in science and engineering? Take a guess. It's only 31%. And for Asians, what do you think it is? It's only 40%. And this is among well-prepared students. So the big secret in America is that even when you've done well in high school with 5s and your perfect SATs, your probability of making it is much lower than you might think it is when you go to college. And there's the challenge that we face in our country, that I think is a major question about our society, because here is the fundamental point. We need more people in these areas, but the question is about the attitude about science. How many of you in this room knew you were a math science type or history, English, arts type by the time you were in the 11th grade? How many of you had a great experience in science in undergrad school? You're a really nice, dirty group. Very good. All right. How many of you know people who did not have a good experience in science in undergrad school? And there's my point to the National Institutes of Health, to the National Science Foundation, and to the research community. If the majority of Americans did not have a good experience while they were in school, why should we expect them to support research funding and funding for science in Congress? So I leave you with this thought. The Chesapeake Bay Retriever is our mascot. And his name is True Grit. And we say that UMBC is the house of grit. All right? And what we are pushing in the country is that we should stop talking about these students as smart and these students as not smart. It's not about smart. I have students. I have a young scholars program for children as young as 9. I'll get students through the calculus sequence when they're 12 and 13, but we don't tell them they're smart. It's about grit. It's about the hard work, the resilience, looking in the mirror, learning how to get back up when you get knocked down, working in groups, and the connecting between faculty and students that can make all the difference in the world. I started by talking about dreams. I never could have imagined that this week I'd have had a call to Dr. Bryant from one of my students saying that he'd gotten one of these White House Early Career Awards. It is a remarkable achievement for your institution, for ours, for his. And so I want Kof to stand. I'm so proud of him. Kof, you can stand. Questions that you and I together, our institutions, have the opportunity to produce children of all races who can be cops, who can one day solve all these problems if we only have the vision, the commitment, and the grit. Thank you all very much.